The Sunday Papers
on Off the Ball.
Now then, great to have you along. Sunday Papers. Won't be surprised to see that Irish rugby dominates the back pages. The Sun go with French toast. Ireland 32, France 19. Picture of Conor Murray, Johnny Sexton hailing him as unbelievable after he helped Ireland claim a stunning win over France. Sexton lauding Murray. Difficult week, as you might imagine, in a very serious way in the Murray household. A Sunday Mirror. Picture of Conor Murray, this time with Andrew Porter. Yes, we can. Ireland close in on Grand Slam as Sexton hails unbelievable number 9. And then we have Pep Guardiola here. City boss mocks Prem and says, was Gerrard's slip our fault? I mean, what can we do if Gerrard slips? Nothing to do. That's one of the great pieces of logic. Sunday Times go with James Lowe's try, and they say touch of luck. Controversy in Dublin as Lowe's wonder leap helps Ireland to victory over France. I think the replays subsequent to the decision being made are conclusive, and the try shouldn't have been given. I suppose controversy maybe doesn't quite reign because Ireland were such emphatic winners, although I dare say French media sees it somewhat differently. And then Liverpool to back Klopp for summer rebuild, says Jonathan Northcroft. So they're about to name a successor to Dr. Ian Graham, who built their data science department, and they're going to spend lots of money, apparently. And Klopp, his mood is to go again, and he's been buoyed by indications he will be given significant resources to overhaul his playing personnel. So that's the Sunday Times. Then we have Sunday World here. Slam dunk, Sexton, brilliant and brave Ireland are in for magical Six Nations glory, and war cry to rivals from Pep. So, I mean, they're not going quietly into the night, Man City. Magnifique is the Mail, and Sunday Superb Ireland hand out French lesson in classic, and that is the general refrain across the pages as we'll come to. This was a classic. Picture there of the team celebrating one of the tries as a group. Have the Sunday Independent. It's that picture. I mean, it may not have been a try, but it's an amazing piece of athleticism on Lowe's part to come so close to scoring a try. Ireland's grand plan. Farrell's men show their best in the world. Sexton hails unbelievable Murray as France, our latest side, put to the sword. And then just to mention, it's not really one for discussion, on the Sunday Times main section. So the front page of the Sunday Times, GAA star lied that he had my wife's cancer. High-profile former player accused of conning targets out of €250,000 euro for bogus stem cell treatment in the US. So the quote is from a couple. A man whose wife was diagnosed with cancer believes he was targeted by a prominent GAA star who claimed he had the same form of the disease and needed money to travel to America for treatment. The high-profile former player is being investigated by Gardaí for fraud and deception. This couple in question, who speak on the basis of anonymity, lent the former GAA player €5,000, and they now believe they were targeted because of the wife's life-threatening disease. There was an empathy and concern in his voice. He told me he had the same cancer as my wife, talked about how he'd received revolutionary treatment in Seattle. We don't believe any of it was true. There are, as you might imagine, a number of alleged victims, and detectives are trying to establish whether the suspect was ever given a cancer diagnosis. They do not believe that he has travelled to the United States for treatment. The piece says the family of the GAA star are reeling from shock. It's understood they were unaware of the Garda investigation. The piece also quotes people in the man's hometown. They say they haven't seen or heard from him in a number of months. Some have expressed concern for his welfare. I'd be very worried about him, said one man who knew him. If the rumours are true, then something is wrong, another local said. The suspect, by the way, did repay this couple the €5,000 in the end after they threatened to go to the Gardaí or to contact journalists. And Gardaí, the piece finishes by saying, confirmed that an inquiry was underway into allegations of fraud in the Eastern Division. Not much more we can say about that. Delighted to welcome to the studio Hugh Farrelly, Assistant Sports Editor at The Mail, and we have Dion Fanning, Associate Editor at The Currency. Dion, a great weekend for rugby people.
Thank you, Joe. Well, it was a great weekend for rugby people. I think that
and Irish people.
And Irish people. I found myself on that nexus. I found myself listening to the BBC. I'll just say the BBC rugby podcast this morning, early in the morning when I couldn't get back to sleep, and I was getting angry, which is no help when you're trying to go back to sleep, because they spent so long talking about Scotland Wales, and before they even got to this kind of cursory mention of the Ireland France game, which was thrilling, and the first half especially I think was an extraordinary spectacle, even for the untrained like myself. You could really appreciate what rugby has now, and also those moments which maybe the Sunday Times, although they've used a picture of the try, those moments of controversy in the game where you're like, okay, there is still huge issues, and how you actually disentangle those huge issues that rugby has from the spectacle.
The hit to the herring head, you mean?
Yeah. From the spectacle it is.
Yes.
Because the spectacle is dependent to such a huge degree on that challenge, between that encounter, between the moments like the Hugo Keenan try, but those moments of sort of spectacular athleticism, and the fact that at any second there is a physicality, to use a rugby people's word, that is overwhelming, and that again you see it in that, and you hear it in the crowd when there are challenges that aren't as dangerous as that one, and then you hear it when it goes to that next level. And I thought it was extraordinary, even from a dramatic point of view, even let us put aside for 1 second the referee's decision when Wayne Barnes said he wasn't ruling from a high degree of danger, and the crowd are just it's gladiatorial, like it's just the crowd are kind of ready to are hissing at this thing, but the hit is so is worrying.
Yes, we'll come back to that for sure. To give people a sense of what the papers are saying, they are effusive across the board about this Irish performance.
I've never seen it so effusive.
If Ireland had won the World Cup, it couldn't be more effusive, really.
I mean, we've been, I remember 2018 we beat the All Blacks, and everyone was talking, this is under Joe Schmidt, and that went fairly high level, joy and euphoria. This is off the charts. I've been through it all there, and on the game itself, as Dion alluded to, it was beyond compelling, particularly the first half. But some of the stuff, Roy Curtis called it miraculous sorcery. Bernard Jackman, that's Roy Curtis in the Sunday World. Bernard Jackman in the Sindo, as good a test match as I've ever seen. Brendan Fanning, who's been around since Jackie Kyle was winning Grand Slams, and would be, I know Brendan well, but he would have seen it all. His book, From There to Here, is the definitive book on Irish rugby. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
But he would be laconic in style generally, and he was calling it savage stuff. It was incredibly compelling, and David Kelly in the Sindo was probably the most poetic. He said, wherever one looked, from the elusive Dupont to the effortless Keenan, from the irrepressible Fiku to the dazzling Penno, wonder stole the heart. Which is, nice cadence and all that. But now, we've been here before, and the haters, there's enough of them out there in rugby, and they'll say, we're getting ahead of ourselves again. And, you can see where they're coming from. But the quality of this performance, it's like, how long am I watching rugby now? 40 years. It's the best coach team I've ever seen in an Ireland green jersey. They just look utterly in control of what they're doing, and it's you can see why. There's a lot of talk about the Aviva Stadium and people going out for pints and all that. That didn't seem to be a factor yesterday. That's an atmosphere. No, I wasn't there. I was working, but it seemed to be all in it together. And the natural progression, as Rory Keane says in the Mail, you know, all aboard the hype train, next stop Paris. You know, we have to think about the World Cup. And if you were to introduce a caveat, what would concern me slightly is that injury seems to be our best selector at the moment. We're finding out things about Ross Byrne, Jack Crowley, Finlay Bealham because of injury. Whereas you wonder, would they be better off getting ahead of it? You know, most people seem to be of the opinion that we go after having read all the papers, we focus on the Grand Slam now and go that way. But there's still question marks over this team. For example, Hugo Keenan, if he gets injured, you know, what's our plan B? Gary Ringrose, these kind of questions, which I wouldn't mind seeing answered over the remainder of the championship, you know.
Stephen Jones, who I think unfairly, certainly in the years I've been reading him, has a reputation as being somewhat low to praise Irish rugby. I think that's an unfair reputation he has. He starts off his piece by saying it was an honour just to be there in any capacity. So again, this is not just green eyes. An honour to be there. It was two of the best teams of the whole era. He's talking of rugby of late. It was a blistering contest of ambition and skills. What more could you want, especially if you were Irish and you were supporting this skillful powerhouse and knowing team? And then we have Stuart Barnes over the next page, and he opens his piece by saying this match was on another level. And he talks about Ireland. The precise positional attacking game doesn't just happen. It's an immense feat of organisational rugby and on the part of the management and the players. And he says Ireland have some well-nigh perfect patterns, although he does add nothing to match the individual genius of France. Peter Riley's very good piece. I mean, there's a kind of an extra analytical layer to his piece where he is talking about how during the week the French media worried about fatigue and fitness. They had a graph in Midi Olympique to show that only 4 Irish players, Ringrose, Ryan, Tadhg Byrne, Andrew Porter, had played more minutes than their opposite number. And so Galtier is frustrated with the fatigue issue. But he points out as well, France kicked the ball far less than they usually do, which he found surprising given the fitness issues. And one last one, seeing as I'm just flicking through the times in front of me. Neil Francis, I mean, he opens the possibility that this was perfection. Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away.
See, Joe, this stuff is terrifying, right? I mean,
do you want to know what's terrifying?
No,
Page 7 of the Sunday Times. Ireland unhappy with Paris World Cup hotels.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Reminds me of.
Good God! Back we go. Why can't we get a hotel in this country?
Can we just cool the jets here a small? Because I'm in my 50s now. I remember the first World Cup. If we flame out again in September, that's going to be 40 years of World Cup failure.
This is different, though.
I know you're winding me up now.
No. I think genuinely.
Okay, I accept
think back to 4 years ago, 2019,
but there's still questions to be answered. They went off a cliff. We know what our first choice team is, and I love the way Farrell's gone about it. I love the Emerging Ireland tour. I love the way he's embracing disruption, as he says. So you find out things. But what happens if we get to that quarter final and we're missing Ringrose, Keenan, Doris? You know, Josh Van der Fleer, World Player of the Year.
I appreciate that.
Who's our backup number 7? We don't know. Does Omani switch up? So I'm getting excited now.
Yeah. Having said that, by the same token, if France pitch up in a World Cup quarter-final and they're missing Dupont,
they've been doing this for 4 years,
and several others, any team's weakened by injuries.
They cleaned the decks after last World Cup when they bombed.
Yeah,
but so Antoinette goes down and Jalabert comes in.
Yeah, the answer to your question is probably that injury will scupper Ireland as it can any other team.
That either,
but that can happen. So I don't think anyone can plan for losing 4 or 5 players.
Well, the system should hold up, and I would be cautiously optimistic, because in 2015 we lost our 5 players and the system broke down. The defence, which had been doing rush all the time, hung back off the RGs and they blitzed us. Something broke down. The way this team is coached, you'd like to think that the systems would hold. I mean, certainly the evidence so far would suggest that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what you gain from. Are you saying you would sort of surrender a Grand Slam?
Yes, 100%.
No,
100%. We've won the Grand Slam. We have won the.
But hold on a second. No.
Good luck.
I've seen enough Six Nations.
2 rugby men getting heated here.
I'm an all-round sportsman.
we get caught up in the immediacy of success.
I don't think. But I don't think
40 years of failure.
What do you gain from, say, putting say, leaving Johnny Sexton out to establish something, say when Ireland play England or when Ireland play Scotland, is what you're suggesting. What do you gain from that? If, say, Ireland lose and the players, what is the purpose of it?
Okay.
What do you actually establish by playing a weakened team, losing
nothing? And like
and then you're saying, right? Well, no, oh my God! Now we don't have the the strength and depth that we need, and now we've also lost a Grand Slam.
And I might add, Warren Gatland has more Grand Slams, or the same number of Grand Slams as Ireland in our history.
Warren Gatland's been to the World Cup semi-final.
I appreciate
so
that.
The Scots and so the Argentinians.
I think whatever you do,
nothing matters more than the World Cup.
I think whatever happens, Ireland are going to go into the World Cup with the pressure of what they've done in all their previous World Cups and what they failed to do.
True.
So there's no way around that, no matter what you do.
There's a way of future-proofing it. I mean, the nation discovered Ross Byrne in November when he kicked the thing. Ross Byrne has been there for 5 years, and this isn't hindsight talking. This has been...
Well, the Irish management discovered him. I think the Irish nation were well aware Ross Byrne was doing well for Leinster.
But no, the media weren't pushing him, only in certain quarters.
No, that's true. But so take who's the backup to Hugo Keenan? Most likely.
Most likely Mac Hansen.
Okay.
But he's played there a couple of times for Connacht. We haven't seen him there for Ireland.
But I mean, what difference is one game for Mac Hansen?
We had Rob Kearney. Hugo Keenan is exceptional, by the way. Like, I just think, just as an aside, he's like a fella you'd meet for a pint. Like, he's like a guy working for AIB who plays a bit of tag rugby on a Tuesday. He doesn't look like this uber athlete. He's exceptional.
Yeah.
Like, he's the best in the world, to my mind. Anyway, so who replaces him? We have a history. We had Rob Kearney for years, who was superb, and now Keenan. And we've tried a few in between. We tried Luke Fitzgerald, Jacob Stockdale. Hasn't worked out. We need to find out.
Jordan Larmour.
Jordan Larmour, correct.
But one game isn't going to find out much.
Well, what happens if, the most important game, arguably in history, is going to be that quarter-final. You're up against France or New Zealand.
Yeah.
Do you know? Are we just conceding it now and let's go for the slam? Do you know?
Well, I don't understand the link between the two. I don't understand why if you somehow surrender the Grand Slam, that means that now we're sure that Ireland will beat France in that quarter final.
No, it's a bit late now. I accept that.
No, but I don't think there's anything that you can do about that.
I'd love to know.
The quarter final in the World Cup hasn't been played yet, so there's nothing you can do before it's played to say.
There is. You can know for a fact what happens if certain situations arrive. I think France are in a better position now. I don't think France are that despondent today, because they know they'll come good in later on in the year. No, I think there's huge respect for it. I mean,
I think the thing that's interesting about this on a when we get down to it, and again it's the extraordinary coverage, and as Hugh says, there are people who will be sceptical of rugby who will be kind of rolling their eyes at this coverage again at this stage. But there is another thing too, that like you look at where rugby is in every other country in the world, and like the degree of kind of decay and the way that so many countries are financially in all different ways, they do not have the strength that Ireland do. And it reminds me, then we'll talk about horse racing in a different context, but it reminds me a little bit of how we still look at Irish trainers and racehorses going to Cheltenham, and we celebrate this. As now people don't still refer to it as the kind of underdogs. We celebrate it as some kind of miraculous achievement when it is actually just a reflection of the wealth and the balance, the financial balance of the sport. And rugby is the same. Irish rugby is, it's an incredibly well funded and well oiled machine with great advantages. That are now materialising thanks to excellent coaching but the strength and depth is growing all the time because of the way the game is developed in this country, and the way you have
and it's going to get stronger, Dion. The system is incredible at the moment.
Yeah,
the
and
20s and
all that, and I saw that, and like somebody was saying this to me about the under-20s game, and you see these players they're playing like a French team who have got players in, like, not the top French teams, but they're playing, and these guys have never played a game, and they're the products of schools, the schools and that system, which is incredibly well funded.
Yes,
incredibly well funded. Every other sporting association in this country would be just stunned to be getting this funding from an outside source, which is
a private venture.
Private venture.
Yeah.
No, it's and so like
it's the greatest conveyor belt in Irish sport.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. You're not talk to Hugh. He's the one.
No, hang on now.
He's the one ruining what I thought was going to be.
No.
But this,
don't get me wrong.
The point about that is, let me just think. The point about that is that there are huge advantages that Ireland have that maybe they've never had before, and they will have more of an impact on a World Cup quarter final than than
please don't get me wrong here, right?
By dropping their best players.
I watched that yesterday and I was blown away by it, and I'm so impressed with Farrell. Like, even the way he's, it was quite fractious. I'm a big Joe Schmidt fan, by the way, but I was off the beat when he took over the Ireland job, but it got quite tense with the media and stuff, and Farrell's sorted all that. The coaching is superb. I've never seen them play so well. The skill levels, I mean, Doris, all props doing these passes, and all that is good. I just have this, oh, please God, don't let it happen again kind of thing. And I just want to do everything possible. I could not care less about the Grand Slam compared to getting to a first.
It could still happen.
I'll just say one more thing, Dion, right? If we get to World Cup semi-final, you've no idea how big that is.
Grand Slam is bigger than a World Cup semi-final.
Okay, you're just like hopping the ball now.
It is. What's a World Cup semi-final?
No, that would be pretty big for Irish rugby.
40 years I've been watching this. 40 years, and they've been screwing up every time.
If you were a player, would you rather win a Grand Slam in Dublin against England or get to a semi-final of a tournament?
Well, given Ireland's history, a semi-final.
I think
it'll be quickly forgotten.
It will go nuts in this country if you get to World Cup
Yeah,
semi-final.
for the 3 or 4 days until they lose.
No, I think a World Cup semi-final would be bigger. But I don't think anything.
Let's not sacrifice a Grand Slam, though. That's still a huge achievement.
We're beginning to sound like English football here now. Let's not sacrifice this as we war game our
Let's
way
win the
into
Grand Slam. We'll see what happens. Grand.
But sorry, why is winning a Grand Slam going to have a negative effect on the World Cup?
Well, okay.
You just want to play like everyone's third choice.
The ideal scenario here, right? And I think this is what Farrell's going for, and I commend him for it. Is the Woodward 03, right? You have your strongest team.
Yeah.
You play consistently.
Momentum.
And you just nail it down and you win the World Cup, right? Now,
because this team has never won a Six Nations under Farrell. And if we talk about milestones, beating Southern Hemisphere opposition, etc., winning a competition,
psychological and all that.
Can you win your first competition as a World Cup? Arguably, that's a difficult thing to do.
Look at England in that team, right? Wilkinson was 23 at the time. They'd Paul Grayson after 50 caps to step up.
Yeah.
They cover. Mike Catt was there to come in for Greenwood or Tyndall or fullback for Josh Lucy. They'd cover everywhere. Established.
Ireland are pretty close to covering every single position.
I know.
As close as any team can
Maybe
realistically
I'm worrying too much. We're going to cruise it.
Yeah. You being in, a state of fear for the next 6 months isn't going to improve Ireland's chances. I know you feel you have some control over this situation, but you don't.
Anyway, well done. The Grand Slam isn't going to improve Ireland's chances.
Can I point out, by the way, I've never seen this before in the player ratings. Now, the Sunday Times give him an 8 out of 10. Sunday Independent give Caelan Doris a.
It's got to be. It's a 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10, Caelan Doris. Perfection.
I haven't seen one of them since Dricko.
There you go. A 10 out of 10 for Caelan Doris in the player rating, Sunday Independent. On that, Ireland unhappy with World Cup hotel. I kid you not. 7 months out, Ireland are not happy with their Parisian hotel. Now, their main base in Tours, where they'll spend most of their time, is absolutely A-OK. But in terms of a hotel in Paris with a gym and training facilities and not too far from the Stade de France, they can't seem to get anywhere. The issue is especially sensitive for the RFU, given painful memories of France 07. Now, you want something to worry about.
Yeah.
There you go.
Let's not go back to France 07.
No.
Jeepers.
So just to finish, by the way, Neil Francis, and it picks up on the point you made, Dion, he says various things about the performance, a proper test match, no distractions. He said the quality was obvious. Dry balls, serious intent, high level of emotional battlefield intelligence. Just 5 scrums, he points out. He lists various players. He says the NFL metric of yards after contact is one that Doris wins every time. Andrew Porter is one of the best work ethics on the planet. He makes a tackle, then his twin brother makes a tackle a second later. Antonio just can't do that. And he does point to the fact that, France and their bigger men couldn't compete with the intensity of this game as it went on. On to the yellow card that many suspect should have been a red. He says, I'm sure Antonio will be cited, but the point here is that there has to be consequences for refereeing inconsistency. Wayne Barnes is a very good referee, but he does try and be a little too contrarian in his approach and application. And he makes an interesting observation as well, and I think we've all seen this in rugby matches. Matthew Carley, the assistant referee on the pitch at the time, agreed with Barnes, but to me, his body language said something different. And Neil Francis writes, the first rule when refereeing teams go out onto the park is that when the referee makes a decision on replay, no matter how ridiculous, they are some way honour bound not to call him out in front of millions of people. And I don't know to what extent Matthew Carley would have felt a pressure to not call out Wayne Burns in front of millions of people, but it does tend to occur to viewers that at times the body language of that assistant suggests he doesn't actually agree with the referee.
Again,
here,
when Barnes said what he said about the high degree of danger, there was this sort of really?
Yeah. Show me what you think high degree of danger is, because decapitation is an option. Francis does continue, by the way, quite why there was no immediate withdrawal of Herring when it was obvious he wasn't right is a continuing stain on the game. How do they keep getting it wrong when the rules are as clear and concise as they are? I think that
the rules are wrong, though.
The same point applies to George North, who went through a couple of phases before eventually being withdrawn. Murrayfields yesterday. That there does seem to be a lag for some reason.
But there's a solution there, Joe. Like, I don't like going after referees and stuff. It's a tough job, you know, and I don't think anyone willfully sets out to get it wrong, obviously. But they brought in this thing in England a couple of weeks ago, which they abandoned, the tackle around the waist thing, which was madness. The rule should be chest height for the armpits down. You bring that rule in, players will have to start lower. So if they slip up, they'll be hitting you here. Immediately, it's a safer game. Yeah. And they won't do it. I mean, that suggestion's been out there for years. You bring that in. That was horrendous yesterday. We've talked about the euphoria and all that. It got a bit lost because it wasn't the main focus compared to Irish brilliance. But he's an enormous human being, Antonio. He's 6'5", 21 stone, I think. Yeah. You know, and we saw the slow motion. I mean, what about the children? But there's kids watching that, like, and shoulder going in. I mean, slow motion. You can see his face. It's horrible to watch.
Failed his HIA.
The thing that strikes me again is that the rules are just so. There are so many things that you're looking for in terms of the rules, and it's stuff that you could be arguing in a kind of commercial court, like various different sub-clauses, and even with that rule change, I think they changed it in France to something similar, but they also changed what the ball carrier. I know this, Brett Igo, who writes for the Currency, told me this is not my own knowledge.
Brett's great, by the way.
But they also changed the rule for the ball carrier, so you can't kind of turn into a cannon. Like, so there seems to be there are so many rules about something that is so fundamental that it's almost impossible to know how you get to a point where they're easily enforced and properly enforced to protect people. And I think ultimately you need to look at it again. Sean Keyes, who writes on finance for the Currency, but who's always banging on about rugby, and this is his point: make it a 90-minute game of 13 players, and change the physical element so that actually you then reward faster, smaller players than the people who again, you see it with France bringing on a whole new forward liner, having that potential. Make it something that actually the lighter, quicker players have an advantage thanks to the fundamental underpinning of the game. And that to me seems like the only way you actually change the emphasis. Now, whether that would make it the spectacle that people love, and there is that element that people want, that they don't want those kind of tackles that Herring got, but they do want the physical element.
They want that exact tackle on Herring a few inches lower, but they do want that
gladiatorial
crunch, and they want to watch the slow motion replay of it.
Yeah.
And they want to watch the whiplash.
But into the midriff, not into the face.
Gary Ringrose on Bigger may be a good example last week. So, to sum up the rugby situation, Hugh Farrelly aside, everything is A-OK.
Bring Hugh back after the France for the France quarter-final.
We will bring you right back after the quarter-final.
It's a personal thing. I'm on my own here. I accept that.
As a matter of interest, I take the full back point, and a problem there is that Hugo Keenan has been so consistently brilliant. And to be fair, Farrell wants to win games and build momentum.
I get that.
Keenan's hard to take out. What other positions?
As is
Ringrose. But you would say at centre we're well stocked and there's lots of experience there. So Keenan aside, and of course you would like Sexton to be fit. Well, like, where else are we in dangerous sleepwalking?
We are finding out, but only through injury. Like, we found out now that we can live without Gibson Park to a degree. Maybe not to operate at the same level.
Do you think Farrell's logic is, I'm not going to willingly take out players because in a game as physical as this, injury's going to force me to do it along the way anyway.
Maybe, I don't know.
That's what he seems to be saying, isn't
It's
it?
working,
We're going to deal with these things
as they come, rather than take Hugo Keenan out of a Six Nations game.
Just as a quick one, I'd love to see Ryan Baird involved. He's the most exciting forward I've seen come through ever. I remember young Malcolm O'Kelly in the mid-90s, but Baird is an exceptional athlete. France have a guy called Cameron Wokey, who's injured at the moment, who I believe is probably pound for pound best in the world, and Baird is up there. And he gives you something. Now, you have Omani there who brings you something kind of almost intangible, like he's got the presence, kind of Paul O'Connell factor. But I just love to see these guys before we get to the real deal, you know. But look, it's going brilliantly so far, so don't mind me.
Why do you say that in such a...
Don't mind everything.
It's just the length of time, you know.
I know, if the World Cup could start next week.
But look, this is just reality. Like how when Fabinho tackled Evan Ferguson a couple of weeks ago, it was torture. There's nothing you can do about these things. Yet when something happens, you're like, why did that have to happen?
Well, that's maybe a good approach. You know, let what happens.
Well, but thank you. That's how I live my life.
Whatever the literary quote is.
Really.
We'll move on. So I'll try and sum this up as best I can. This is a 4-page piece in the Sunday Independent, and it gets, on the front page of the Sunday Independent, it flags that this story is inside. It's Paul Kimmage, and the headline is "The Trainer, the Mayor, and a Horror Story That Shames Racing." So this is about animal welfare as opposed to performance-enhancing drugs of any kind. So the piece is about a trainer, Homer Scott. Homer Scott won a couple of times at Cheltenham back in the late 80s and early 90s. Probably wouldn't be a household name, certainly to anybody with a casual interest in racing at this stage. So Homer Scott is from Antrim. His career started on the Curragh in the 1970s. Like I said, a couple of wins at Cheltenham, and he was second in a Trainers' Championship one year as well, and is now more he's in his 60s now more in the breeding territory. He had a horse, Raj, which has proved to be popular and has preempted a segue more so into breeding than training. So Lisheen Stud, 350 acres of rolling fields in County Kildare. Lisheen Stud is set there, home to, and this is when Michelle Shannon arrived to work at the stud in 2015. She turned full-time, arrived shortly before that. So it's set in Kildare, 2 stallions, 40 broodmares, sprinkling of yearlings, foals, and whatever Scott happened to be training. She said in this piece, and she is interviewed, and there's a photo of her with David Mooney, who's her partner, and David Mooney also has experience of this stud. There's a photo of the two of them standing stern-faced, staring down the camera. And so she says, he only had about 2 or 3 at the time. He used to send his better bred horses to be trained by Ger Lyons and Jessica Harrington. So I suppose some of this is upsetting, really. She went full-time in 2015. She talks about imitation, this horse, first of all, who is pregnant, 22 years of age, had a problem with her hips and was starting to creak. I said to him, as in Scott, I think the mare is going to foal tonight. She's looking a bit shook. We'll bring her into the shed, and if you give me 100 quid, I'll sit up with her. No, he says, you're not bringing her in. I'll keep an eye on her. I went in the following morning, and he was like a bear. I should have got you to sit up with her. What had happened, basically, was, and this is Michelle talking, they're born in this bag. Sometimes it breaks, or the mare will break it, but Imitation wasn't able to get up and break the bag. She stayed down, and the foal suffocated. And the piece goes on this same mare, Imitation. Hardly a month had passed since her foal had died, and she was about to be covered again. And Michelle was distraught. I said, Homer, you can't do that. The poor mare, she's not going to be able to hold up a stallion. And nothing would do him only to have her covered, though. It turned out exactly as she feared, writes Paul Kimmage. They brought the mare down. I was holding Raj, and the minute Raj went to get up on her, she dropped like a fly. He said, we'll give her a few minutes and try again. I lost the plot. You're not going to try her again. I led Raj back and started to cry. The following day, he wanted it done again. Same thing. The mare went straight down. I said, that's it, Homer. But Imitation would fall again, writes Paul Kimmage. It was a day later, she says. Homer let out the stallion. Got a friend of his to hold the mare. I just refused to do it. This time she went down and didn't get up. She was still in the same spot a day later. the sand ring where we lunge the horses and cover the mares. So he got this guy to call out with one of those mini diggers. They put some ropes around her and dragged her about 80 metres to a stable around the back where no one would see her. Homer wanted her standing or in a standing position. He thought the injury might repair if she wasn't lying down, so they connected her to a sling and they hung her from the roof where she died. So I mentioned Christy Mooney then. David Mooney. Christy is his father, partner of Michelle. He went to get a horse covered at Homer's yard in 2019. He says, I got the mare covered. I was shocked at the state of the place. There were over 60 horses and Michelle had to do most of it on her own. Michelle later on says, if you mentioned spending money, it was always a no. He had 20 odd horses in each field, wasn't willing to feed them properly, even during the winter. When there was no grass, all they got was a few oats. I remember there was a horse one day in bad need of a vet, and I mean dire need, so I went to him. This horse needs to be put to sleep, Homer. I'm ringing the vet. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. And he absolutely lost the plot with me. You couldn't talk to him. David then says, it would depress you. The mares were riddled with lice. Obviously weren't wormed. Some of their feet were like donkey's feet. So I bought some worm doses and did them for lice as well. Michelle says, every year we lost horses. There was a mare called Causeway Coast that went to skin and bone in the field. I'd only been there a short time, maybe 2 or 3 months, and he brought the mare to the back shed. It was an absolute cruelty case. Hips sticking out, backbone ribs. She lay on her side for 3 days, groaning and dying. I remember thinking, oh my God. David says there were at least 4 mares buried the first year I was there. And on it goes in this general tone. The two of them, I think, have been interviewed together because they're in conversation at a certain point. They, as in the horses, they were dropping like flies, said David. What was the one buried up by the hedge? Michelle, Thrift. He got her in the summer and she was gone in 6 months. And then Positano is one in a video. So a video is mentioned. Positano is the one in the video, says Michelle. We brought her into the shed and we're trying to feed her, but she had gone that far that she just died. So the Department of Agriculture get involved, and it's obviously a very damning scene that they arrived to see. So 5 officers, Department of Agriculture, arrive. At one stage they chat to Homer and say, look, what we've seen is not good. The condition of the sheds, the horses have died. We were told by the person who reported you that there was a horse lying in the field not so long ago. And there are various back and forths there. In the end, the Department of Agriculture issue him with an opinion that he's not fit or capable of taking care of the animals, and there's a list of things he should do, and they have to be done by July 2022, 9 a.m. or else. And these are just basic animal welfare clauses, you know, general upkeep of the animals. It seems that Lynn Hillier, who's with the IHRB, comes out as well, and this is in advance of the deadline to do these various things for the horses. And she said, are you aware that your list, or whatever the proper name for it is due to be done by 9 a.m. tomorrow? He said, I am. She said, well, am I going to find that everything is done? Because there's one thing I can see straight away that's not done. Then Homer started to rile up. This is Michelle's account. And Homer started to rile up. I've held a license longer than you're alive. You're not going to take it away from me. Michelle, for instance, just to give a sense of things, describes a conversation with Lynn Hillier of the IHRB, where, you know, Lynn is on the grounds and she asks, for instance, how many mares are in foal? Michelle says, I told her I didn't know because none of them had been scanned. She was horrified. It was June. There could be twins. So we had to box every single one of them to get them scanned, 36 of them. There are further visits, Department of Agriculture, and in the end, the license is revoked. So the point is made in this piece, though, that even after she left, Michelle had left, she was getting messages which concerned her about practices. And she put this to Lynn Hillier and said, I'm really upset. Why has nothing been followed up by yourselves or the Department of Agriculture regarding poor horse welfare? I was told that sheep and horses are dying. And Lynn Hillier looks into that. The conclusion of the piece, because it is a dense piece, but it seems at the moment that the IHRB, that's Lynn Hillier, they have secured the surrendering of Mr. Scott's trainer's licence. Therefore, he can't act in that capacity, and therefore they feel that's their duty served, and it's up to the Department of Agriculture now to ensure that the 60 or the 50 or so horses still on that land are being looked after. So that's the Department of Agriculture, who it seems have paid visits, but it's not entirely clear where they are with it because they can't comment on ongoing investigations. And that is the end of the piece. Now, I should stress, as a final point, and sorry, I know I've gone on a bit here. On Thursday, Homer Scott spoke to the Sunday Independent, and he said, "I'm the best man in Kildare to look after horses." And he said, Imitation, that's one of the horses that was left and out in a field for far too long, allegedly. Imitation had been put down and taken away by Molloy Animal Collection, and Ned Dean of that company confirmed he had disposed of some animals for Scott but had no recollection of Imitation. And then the video of Positano Princess lying in a field dead, Homer Scott said, "I don't know. Why are people saying bad things about me? Like, I mean, my horses are all well fed and they're all well looked after." He added, "I didn't do anything bad to my animals. All I do is look after them as best I can," says Homer Scott. Paul Kimmage, "You don't bury horses on your land." Scott says, "I certainly do not. I buried a few horses up until about 3 years ago, a couple of horses on the land, and they told me not to do it again, and I didn't." Paul says, "So the video is false." Homer Scott, "So, sorry, what video is that?" And Paul says, "The video of the dead horse that was buried on your land, January 22. Scott says, "I don't know. Is there many people burying horses on land?" Paul says, "I've no idea. I'm asking about your land and what you do." And Scott says, "No, I don't bury any horses. I had a horse died this week and the people came and looked at it yesterday." And like I said, Department of Agriculture say they don't comment in relation to ongoing investigations, but the training licence certainly has been revoked. That's about as good a job as you can do to sum up a piece this long. And again, we should emphasise, Homer Scott says, nobody better to look after horses than me. And Michelle Shannon and David Mooney here are very much on the record with Paul Kimmage. And there is no doubt that the training licence has been revoked by the IHRB. As to where the Department of Agriculture are with the horses still on that land, we don't exactly know. It's an upsetting piece to read, first off. I think that was I asked you outside Hugh, and you said it's just upsetting to read.
Yeah, particularly that piece you read out about Imitation. Could I just talk about Kimmage first, if you don't mind, with a newspaper hat on? Like, we're in an era for newspapers of like dwindling resources in journalism, and this is like old school, you know, Spotlight. I don't know if you know that film where you kind of put someone on special ops for a time. Yeah, and it's very important. And like, I've been a fan of Kimmage's since A Rough Ride, the book he did about his cycling career, and who am I to, you know, nitpick Paul Kimmage given what he's done in his career? But I wouldn't be a massive fan of the Q&A Rory McIlroy stuff. Not into golf, and I don't like that style because I think he's an exceptional writer. Like, he when you start in the game, I remember being told, tell it simple, tell it straight, and he's a style of writing that brings you along. And this is and these are the type of pieces that I really think he's made for, you know. There's a lot to it, as you said, it's dense, it is upsetting, and you know, there's obviously legal implications and all that. It once again, it throws an unsavoury spotlight on racing, which, no, I don't know enough about racing, but my own opinion of racing is I think it's a business, not a sport. It irritates me around Cheltenham particularly when it's like painted out to be this, what do they call it, the sport of kings, Dion, is it? You know, this kind of, you know, mythical, you know, wonderment. And I always note when a famous horse dies, like a best mate or an imperial call, the eulogies are almost talk about it like it was a person, you know, like, you know, well, he had a great personality every day, he'd greet you with it, whatever. But what about the horses that don't make money? You know, where do they go? Like, is it just a bullet to the, or however they do it, behind the sheds, you know? And there's a deep cynicism at the heart of racing, and I think Paul Kimmage has thrown a spotlight on it, as I said, and this is there's a lot in this piece, and it's upsetting. And if this is, you know, one example of what's going on, how far does it go? Like, I mean, when did Gordon Elliott, that image of the horse and stuff, it's just, I don't know, do we just accept it?
In fairness to Elliott, he was absolutely adamant, and those in his yard adamant that that horse was perfectly well cared for.
Yeah.
But the optics, as you say, are difficult.
But do we have to turn a blind eye because of the amount of revenue it generates? Do you know, I mean, it's a huge industry, and it is an industry. I mean, there's a a kind of a half tongue-in-cheek attitude in newspapers that the race card should be the business pages, do you know? Like, but I know one thing is that if you make a mistake on the results or a race card, the phones are hopping, do you know? The people who are, it's part of their routine and all that. It's a very big issue, and I don't know where it goes, Joe. Do you know what I mean? Does racing respond to this, or is this just, you know, the way business is done?
I don't know. There's one last very brief mention, because I referenced a video. So Positano is a horse, and this is David and Michelle. And Michelle says, Positano was the one in the video. We brought her into the shed. We were trying to feed her, but she'd gone that far. She just died. So we pulled her out with the tractor. We left her outside the back of the yard. I said to Homer, you may get the knacker up to take her away. But he didn't want to spend the money. No, I'll get her buried. A few days later, she was still there, beginning to rot. So David said, I'll pull her out to the field or she'll disintegrate. So we pulled her into the field. She was there for 10 days. David says, you forgot to mention Michelle. Yes, sorry. The person Homer used to bury the horses, I don't want to mention his name, he decided he'd had enough. He refused to do it. Now, you can imagine the stench. It was absolutely disgusting. The dogs were up there every day and coming back stinking. I lost it with Homer. He said, right, I'll ring someone else. We had to cover the mare every day to keep the dogs from her. It was desperate. Take a video, David said, and turn it 360 degrees so he can't deny it's his place.
See, like it is harrowing and upsetting, and I think one of the points in the piece is that, like, that, you know, the people, Michelle Shannon and David Mooney, Michelle Shannon in particular, David Mooney, you know, there's a line in it, there's a lot of horsiness in David Mooney, but he's not sure it's in the genes. And they are horse people, as you know, and Kimmage quotes the Simon Barnes book, Horses Can't, you know, Simon Barnes is a writer for the London Times who was a big horse person. He said, horses can't do without humans, and some humans really can't do without horses. And I suppose
horses can do without humans, though, can't they?
Well, yeah, we can come back to that. But I think the point is that these are people who are, you know, and we see it at Cheltenham and see it at those races we all watch. You know, you'll see the people who work in the stables and love the horses and care deeply for the horses, and the people, and Michelle Shannon would be in that vein. She would be somebody who cares deeply about horses, and I suppose in some ways that is the counterpoint to what's going on in this yard and what you might think is going on in racing as a whole. But it doesn't take away from how harrowing it is. And I guess the other point about this, and I know you use the phrase that his license had been revoked, but like that has happened. But again, it is said that the IHRB statement to the Sunday Independent said a summary of the findings from the inspection was provided to Mr. Scott, after which the IHRB secured the surrendering of Mr. Scott's trainer's license. And earlier, Kimmage said by the end of July, Homer Scott had quietly surrendered his trainer's license. So
no record of any sanction.
There was record, and this is contrasted through the piece with what happened to Stephen Mahan, who was he had a 4-year ban following a hearing. It was the longest ever imposed on a trainer. And Stephen Mahan, as people who have followed Kimmage's reporting on horse racing, is somebody who talked to Kimmage about the horse racing and what's going on or what may be going on in horse racing previously. So there's an awful lot of stuff and there's a lot of density in it.
Yeah.
And it is shocking. And I think when we talked about this, I think, Joe, after on this show after Cheltenham, when we talked about how that sense of a sport where that is running out, that is now out of step with the kind of the popular mood, increasingly, you know. And I think we talked about it in terms of how Cheltenham needed a kind of quiet Cheltenham at the time, and you see it like it becomes, it is increasingly to a lot of people. It is the idea that you would have a sporting event where horses may or may not die during it is just alien to so many people. And then you go down into this level of cruelty.
Yeah.
And I think it's a huge issue for racing.
There is just one point I want to mention, because I don't think I made it clear, and I think the Department of Agriculture may have to be more forthcoming here. So Arthur O'Connor with the department, he was the one who issued, the concern that you're not capable of taking care of horses. And by 1st of July 2022, you have to have all the following done. And all the following are things like all horses' feet examined by a farrier, microchipping of horses, reduce the number of mares being kept, ensure that all horses that die are removed to a registered knackery within 48 hours of dying, clean the stables, all that kind of stuff. So all this list. And there is a point made here, just towards the end. We sent an email to Arthur O'Connor with a series of questions, he's at the department, including why officials hadn't revisited the yard by that deadline of July 1st. Why hadn't they revisited the yard? And the response you get is, we don't comment in relation to ongoing investigations. Now, given the amount of money that is given to horse racing generally, I think the department may have to start commenting on questions like that, specific questions like that. And okay, they say it's an ongoing investigation. Let's hope when the investigation concludes. What's the delay in the investigation concluding?
Hugh talks about how it's a hugely, it's a big industry, and whether race cars or whatever should be on the business page. It's also an incredibly well-funded industry by Irish people. Like through the betting levy, which is something that Roy Barrett at the FAI had something to say about recently. But like the money that comes from that, 80% of it goes to horse racing, 20% goes to greyhounds, which is another conversation.
Pat Spillane talked about that today.
Yeah, and
in 2 seconds. Yeah,
but it is, again. So it isn't just a question of, oh my God, we're this gloriously successful miracle workers producing this indigenous ground, from the ground up industry. It is incredibly well funded by the betting levy, and now it's through gambling, and there are questions about that. And I think it's an interesting topic that Roy Barrett started a debate over, and actually I've noticed a few pieces in the racing pages of newspapers since talking about how racing maybe shouldn't be taking this money for granted anymore.
Yeah.
But it is something that, as you say, like this is a well-funded industry, and people need to provide answers all the way through it.
As a broader point, doesn't it just make you consider our relationship with animals? Generally, I mean, we industrialise them. Like any of us, when we buy our food in the local shop and we take the meat from the fridge, if you were to stop any of us, as we do it so carelessly, and to say, would you bet your life savings that this animal was treated well from start to finish?
Yeah.
I don't think any of us would, and I think we just keep that away from the back of our minds, and we've seen videos of, not so much in Ireland, but abattoirs around the world, and it's truly horrific. Any of us who had, saw farms growing up, I did. You see young separated from mothers, and the wailing that follows. Don't tell me they don't have feelings.
We deal with it in different ways, Joe. Like I would eat chicken Kievs now, as opposed to actually looking at the bones and stuff, because I don't want to visualise it, the animal.
Yeah, but isn't that such a cop-out?
Yeah, complete cop-out.
Yeah.
I don't want to know.
These are the mental gymnastics we all perform.
Yeah.
Would any of us kill an animal to eat it that night? A lot of us wouldn't.
But again, that is, there is people like that is changing, and that is evolving, especially among younger people. It's becoming something that more and more people are less inclined to do. And there's, and like when you get into broader issues to do with climate and everything, it's like, how sustainable is that? And actually, it's something that's, Eamon Sweeney has a really fascinating piece on horsing, Sunday Independent, which kind of gets into that. It's like, and again, the paradoxes and counterintuitive stuff about coursing, where he ends it by saying, he said there were protests at these meetings, very, very small. Coursing, yet we're coursing to be banned. The biggest victims might be not by the sports fans, but the Irish hare population.
Yeah,
the survey carried out by Neil Reid found hare population density to be 18 times greater in the conservation areas administered by the coursing clubs than elsewhere.
Yeah.
the netting of hares for coursing caused an annual death rate of just 0.1%. And as he makes a point earlier, the attitude may seem contradictory for someone watching an event which involves the pursuit of hares, but it probably reflects. He's talking about somebody at the event who's cheering on the hare
to get away. Yeah.
Go on, hare. But it probably reflects, that attitude may seem contradictory, but probably reflects coursing's roots in the agricultural community. Yeah. After all, farmers take good care of and sometimes feel affection for animals destined to be killed.
Yeah.
And any of us who know anyone who works or lives or has a farm will be aware of that. Like, there is a deep affection for the
livestock,
animals, and people care for animals. This is to take it away from the Kimmage piece. Like, but there is also a reality about there is a purpose to this.
It's probably important to point out via the Kimmage piece that that's not reflective of everyone across the industry. I'm sure there's.
No, I would genuinely think it is a tiny minority.
Yeah.
And there are bad actors on every stage. And actually, what the piece also shows is an incredible love of animals on Michelle's part and David's part.
Yeah.
Here are two people heartbroken at seeing some of the behaviour. And I think the industry, in many respects, is populated by those people who love animals and therefore get into the industry.
But the point you made about our relationship with animals, I mean, I think the Sweeney piece, I agree with Dion. It was very interesting. He sets it all out, but lets you make your mind up.
Yeah, he starts. What a great opening! This is a column on coursing. It's not for it and it's not against it. It's just about it.
No, I believe the history of coursing, it was savage. I mean, there was no muzzles and all that
until '93.
But no, but then you could stand back and say, I wouldn't say it's a bundle of laughs with a hare being chased. I wouldn't say it's great for the heart
terrified.
rate.
Yeah.
Yeah. But coming from my closeted city existence, is this the way it is in the country? Is it accepted? Is it better now than it was? The point about the population is interesting that Dion raised.
On racing generally, because I'm getting a sense from you that you feel there's a mood bubbling away, and that the general public and racing are out of step. So Pat Spillane ultimately gets around to GA, but he does start by saying how the GA gets kicked around a lot, but actually we're far too self-critical. I focus way too much on negatives. And he says, one thing I know for sure, there's no danger of horse racing being subjected to the same kind of forensic scrutiny GA faces. And he talks about the 2-day Dublin Racing Festival. €2 million was handed out in prize money, but he makes the point only the elite benefited. So, for instance, he says, one day, for example, Willie Mullins had 4 runners out of 7 in one race, 5 out of 8 in another, 6 out of 8 in another. Day 2 wasn't a whole pile better, he says. In other races, he had 3 out of 7, 2 out of 5, 2 out of 6. 7 of the 8 winners on day 2, 7 of the 8 winners were trained by either Mullins or Gordon Elliott. It's a bit like Dublin and Kerry being allowed to enter multiple teams in an All-Ireland. And he does make the point that racehorse owners don't have to pay tax on prize money. You couldn't make it up. The Irish taxpayers handing over soft money to millionaires, billionaires and Arab sheikhs. And just to reference back to the Kimmage piece, an aspect of that story is it is the tale of the struggling small-time trainer where money is tight and corners are allegedly cut.
42 million though, Joe, is the figure he quotes.
Yeah, and
taxpayer money.
He goes on to say, at a time when there's a cost of living crisis, etc., horse racing Ireland is funded by the government to the tune of 72 million. Greyhound industry receives 18 million. This level of government funding is unjust, immoral and wrong on every count. Maybe I'll lay off the GAA for the next few months.
Well, this is interesting in terms of what Roy Barrett came out and said a few weeks ago, and Pat Spillane is picking that up. And there is a little bit of a moral conundrum there, because what they're looking for is gambling money, and the FAI's argument is that the money that people are betting isn't going on horse racing anymore, it's going on football. Now, I interviewed Colin O'Gara last week, and he's talking about, now it's a separate fund, but he's talking about the social impact fund that's part of the new gambling bill, and that's going to come from the betting industry too. He's getting militant in the terms of, like, he's saying, I was saying it was 1%. Now I'm saying, let's price up how much gambling, what money we need in this country to deal with the problem of gambling that we have in this country. Let's price that up first. Let's get that price, and then we'll work backwards from there and take that money from the betting industry. Now, the FAI want this money, which is the betting levy, to be distributed. I'd say the GAA do as well. The prize money for that festival is interesting. Again, that was something I was noticing since Roy Barrett has made his remarks, that this was again mentioned as something. They're talking about the benefit to the economy of this racing festival, but again, it's being funded through the government, but through what people bet on, and all the money that people are betting on is going to horse racing, when we know, being just factual and removing a moral stance for a second, that is not the way people bet anymore. That is not whatever the breakdown is, and I think the figures in the UK are about 40% for something like football. I would be amazed if it's I'd say between everything in Ireland, it's racing is probably now a minority of betting, or no more than 50%, I would imagine. But who knows? Anyway, who knows? He said,
but no other sport is defined by betting to the same extent.
Well, no, that's what I mean. But that's a different point. The point is that they're getting this money, and as Pat Spillane says, they're using it to fund this thing, which we then celebrate as a success story. And when Cheltenham comes along, we'll be talking about it still to a degree in that historic terms of little old Ireland going over there and taking on
Mighty England.
Mighty England, when we are the supercharged. We are the Manchester City in this
Irish prize money dwarfs English prize money.
We are the supercharged state funded entity in this scenario.
So, as a final thought on all of this, then, Hugh, what does a story like this in national newspaper prompt over the next few days?
Didn't Paul Kimmage write about Jim Bolger a while back, and it seemed to fizzle out as well? I just think he should be commended for this piece. It's a serious piece of work, and it's very important. And going back to the point you raised about the ongoing investigation, you'd hope something happens on the back of it.
Yeah.
Hopefully it gets picked up on now by other media outlets and maybe taken further.
Yeah.
But Kimmage deserves to be commended for this.
Well, like I said, it's in the Sunday Independent. Again, Scott denies any wrongdoing, and we'll see where the ongoing, as the Department of Agriculture call it, investigation goes there. We're going to have to race through some pieces because we kind of clock's against us. We've taken our merry time thus far. Really interesting piece if you're watching the Super Bowl this evening. I'm sure it won't escape your attention. And Mark Gallagher writes about it really well here across 2 pages in the Mail on Sunday. He says, in this day and age, this should not be a big deal. But the magnitude of Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts taking to the field for Super Bowl tonight as the first 2 black starting quarterbacks to face each other in American sports showpiece game is likely to resonate for some time. And he quotes Lewis Moore, who's an associate professor of history at Grand Valley State University. This is a hugely significant moment for sport. Mahomes and Hurts, writes Mark, take the field 35 years after Doug Williams became the first black quarterback to play in and win a Super Bowl. Only 6 more black quarterbacks have started in the Super Bowl. Only 6 more in those 35 years. Of the playing populace, 71% in the NFL are of colour, and yet, despite those figures, only 11 of the 32 NFL franchises had a starting black quarterback this season, which was in itself a record. And traditionally, as Moore says, black players weren't considered smart enough to be quarterback. It was said they couldn't learn off the plays and could only run. All these things were leveraged at black players. So in Mahomes, you have a generational talent who will go down as one of the great players. And then at 24, Hurts is younger by 3 years. His story reflects, writes Mark Gallagher, the long-standing stereotyping that goes on against black quarterbacks. He was benched during his college career, and he was advised to find another position if he wanted to be drafted, but he persevered, and he is where he is now. And Moore, who's quoted earlier, says his story just reflects the history of the black quarterback. That sort of attitude still exists out there. And another point is made later on. He says quarterbacks are the face of the franchise, and too many white owners don't want that to be a black man. Broader context, 20 years since the Rooney Rule brought in, and yet in 2023 only 3 of 32 head coaches are African American. And the Rooney rule means well, but it's clearly not getting desired results. Colin Kaepernick is mentioned as well. You know, the effective ending of his career for taking a stand. And Mahomes himself, so the player himself, Mahomes, has referenced the history being made tonight. He said it's special. There are so many great ones that haven't been recognised because of the stereotype of the black quarterback not being able to have sustained success. I'm glad I'm able to be on the world stage with another quarterback in Jalen that's able to play at such a high level. Great piece, really interesting.
Yeah, when Mark said he was going to do it, I was delighted, because he really gets, you know, he made the phone calls, he got the whole sense of what was going on. And I don't follow the NFL, but I'll watch this game tonight now after reading this, you know, which is testament to the job he did in it. I mean, that statement about they weren't considered smart enough is like,
yeah.
I mean, and when you look at, you know, be careful here, but when you look at American history with slavery and stuff, the notion of, you know, the white guy calling the shots to the, you know, while it's the optics are terrible again. But and the one that jumped out here as well, quote from Tyrod Taylor when he was a quarterback for the Bills: "It's always going to be twice as hard just because of who I am, an African American quarterback. Look across the league, we are held to a certain standard. We almost have to be perfect." I mean, it's just, you know, the racism is so. Even in Ireland now, with you know, the stuff that's going on with the protests and stuff, there's this bubbling thing going on, and the most encouraging thing in Irish sport at the moment is you know, it's been dubbed the New Ireland. You know, the Adeleke, Obafemi, it's brilliant. And you read something like this, and you know, we can never take this stuff for granted.
Yeah.
You know, we can't. Like this, you know. Maybe we can't relate to it because we haven't experienced it, but it's important that we know about it.
And actually, you know, you're right to mention the situation here, and no more than the Super Bowl tonight on a grander scale, obviously. But like watching the Republic of Ireland and watching these brilliant new athletes, it's one of these few. Sport provides one of the few arenas which showcases Ireland at its multicultural best, and that's very, very important, because I certainly don't see it. I don't see it in the Dáil. I don't see it in corporate life.
Yeah,
I mean,
sport
point. Is actually one of the few areas
they're role
where we're
models
seeing
for the
it.
generations coming up. You know,
music and other areas.
Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting piece.
I hadn't realised actually. First time two black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl.
Still won't make me watch the Super Bowl.
No,
fair enough.
Too late.
You're a rugby man now, after all.
It's just too late. It's just I was man who likes to go to bed.
Rihanna, the halftime show.
No.
Is it Rihanna?
Apparently, sorry, not apparently. Yes, yeah, it is.
Last year,
well
last
publicised.
year's show was brilliant. Now they won't top that.
Remind me, last year's show.
Snoop Dogg, the coolest man on the planet.
Oh,
and
Eminem.
Yeah.
Rings a vague bell.
Oh, jeez, watched it a million times.
Right. We are massively
Down with the kids
against the clock. Declan Lynch was writing about the Man City situation. Dion, you picked that out. This is in the main section of the Sunday Independent. What's our take on this a few days on, after the shock of Monday's...
Well, it's an extraordinary story, and I find it's incredible that in the Sunday Times sports section there isn't anything, as far as I went through it twice.
There's not much across the board, I would say. I think fatigue has already set in.
Well, you see, the parallel then with other... I need to be a little bit careful here, but the other things that people are charged with that people don't are accused of, that people don't really feel there's any great interest in, is kind of interesting. But this is an extraordinary story. Pep Guardiola's comical press conference.
I didn't see it all. So what was the gist?
Well, the general sense of persecution, the idea that this has been driven by Premier League, the CEOs. He name checked Daniel Levy, which I say went down well.
Why did he name check
well, because it's one of the this was the idea that they were being, and there was an envy, and the clubs that had written, clubs had written to the UEFA when they were charged before. They were found innocent. Then they were actually found. To say they were found innocent is stretching it. They still received, after they went to the Court of Arbitration of Sport, they still received a 10 million ban, or 10 million fine, reduced from 30 million. Yeah. UEFA said that some of the charges weren't proven, that the others were, or CAS said some of them weren't proven, others were time barred. But they never really said, Manchester City, you've been doing nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And before I get to Declan Lynch's piece, it is worth noting what Rob Draper piece in the Mail, he says, And this is just, important because it comes back to Guardiola's point, which I think the stuff he came out to say about Steven Gerrard and the slip and this kind of stuff. We didn't make Steven Gerrard slip. Well, you were there. You were the team that was ready to capitalise on it. Guardiola wasn't manager there, but you were the team that was ready to capitalise on it. And he mentioned Paul Dickoff and Mike Summerby. Paul Dickoff is an interesting one because if Manchester City didn't have the money that they do have, they wouldn't be in the position they are. Now that is a slightly separate point to what they've done with these charges. But if you're trying to argue that money has had no bearing on where Manchester City are and has no bearing on them being in a position where they can capitalise or win the league by 1 point or whatever, then that is a ludicrous argument, which is basically what Guardiola is saying. But it's worth pointing out then, I have this on my phone, that Rob Draper just mentioned, the Premier League have charged City with a variety of offences, such as, according to German magazine Der Spiegel, awarding Roberto Mancini 2 contracts, one which saw him paid 1.45 million by City and a separate 1.75 million consultancy from Al Jazeera FC in Abu Dhabi, and selling off players' image rights to a mysterious company, Fordham Sports Image Rights, which Spiegel claims eventually led back via family trust and a British Virgin Islands company to funding from Sheikh Mansour, the owner of City and Deputy Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. But most of the charges relate to what would effectively be false accounting. So this is, and I think Miguel Delaney made this in a piece this week, this isn't to do with just financial fair play. It's to do, the allegations are actually of fraud.
Yeah. I was wondering, by the way, as an aside, and you may have seen this if you watched the press conference, would Pep have been asked on the record, can you absolutely confirm that your payment comes from Manchester City alone? Are there any other contracts?
Yeah.
Now, you would get a look from him, but it would be a legitimate question under the circumstances.
It would be, but he does a very good line in Moral Outrage.
He does, all right, yeah.
And
affronted,
and that's fine. But we've seen people do good lines in Moral Outrage, and I won't mention who they are. But there's been plenty of people who've done good lines in Moral Outrage over the years in sport, and it hasn't meant anything. And
Dion, can I ask a possibly naive question? How do Man City fans feel about it? Because when you say Paul Dickoff, right, wasn't there Sean Goater and these lads and Tony Grealish and Niall Quinn, and it was kind of romantic.
Do you know what they all
Man
say?
United shadow. Are they?
Do you know what they all say? It's really interesting. One of the common refrains is financial fair play is a sham, as in when we arrived on the scene with our money, then suddenly you put in place financial fair play to pull up the drawbridge so that the established teams would always be ahead of us. And I'm sure they understand in some level. Maybe a few lines were crossed here and there, maybe a touch. But I mean, come on, such is life. That's what I think is the.
That is, and that's an argument made by certain people this week as well. But the counter argument to that is they are the rules.
Don't be so naive.
As in any, you could watch a game of rugby and say, well, why are you playing with this ridiculous rule that you have to throw the ball backwards?
Yeah.
They are the rules. You signed up to the rule. And this is what I mean. This is why the point is that when it's not then, oh God, we've been slightly done on a technicality here. The allegation is a false accounting. Mm-hmm. So it's much more serious than that.
Time is against us. What's the gist of...
Well, Declan Lynch's point is that this is an extraordinary thing to have happened.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
He says the Premier League has no morals as such, yet there's a kind of inverted moral dimension to this. The inalienable right claimed by the oligarchs and other acerbly rich entities to do whatever the hell they want, unhindered by petty regulations. It is the most powerful moral energy of our time. This perverse sense of self-righteousness on the part of the super rich, this entitlement to own everything worth having in this world, from football to golf to democracy itself. As such, the amazing thing about Abu Dhabi being hit with these 115 charges spanning 14 years is that the Premier League somehow found within itself the sheer impertinence to challenge these true rulers of the universe on anything. And that is one of the reasons why there is such a shock at this.
Yeah.
And I don't think it jeopardizes the Premier League to say they might lose these titles. I think it's imperative that they lose the titles. But you also see the fact that and Declan mentions this as well, that when Jurgen Klopp came out and said that there are three teams who can do what they want financially, and he said that's fine, they're not breaking any laws, but there are 3 teams who can do it, and he mentioned them. there was a private suggestion from Manchester City that Klopp was being xenophobic, which he was rightly furious about.
Yeah.
But again, the waters are muddied so much, and we talk about Manchester City fans, the waters are muddied so much by the responses to these things, that everything, and we know how this will end up in an argument and counter-argument, an online debate. And Declan makes the point, and if you even mention this, I imagine this will lead to quite a counter-response online. He says, I don't know any fans of Manchester City. Now I know a couple, but I don't. There is something interesting. His point is that they haven't seemed to have. There's something charmlessness of the Abu Dhabi sports watching project has sort of somehow denied people, or led to people not being interested. And I asked, now this is very unscientific, but I asked my 8-year-old son the other day, do any of his friends support Manchester City? No.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, he mentioned one guy, he said, but I don't think he actually does. He supports loads of clubs.
Yeah.
But none of his, and there's Chelsea fans. There's
because I'm of the 90s where we all either supported Man United or Liverpool, and that was it.
Haaland might change that.
Haaland has changed that. Haaland is the one thing that's kind of changed that because he's such a phenomenon.
Yeah, but then as soon as he leaves, they'll follow Haaland at PSG or wherever he goes. We are out of time. Is there any last piece, Hugh, you want to direct people towards? We don't have time to get into it, but just you should check it out. Thought it's worth mentioning.
Kerry FC piece was.
Oh yeah, Tommy Connelly's piece.
Yeah,
Tommy's piece. Yeah.
Kerry FC are in the first division.
Just interesting.
Of Ireland.
I didn't know anything about it, and
they're playing against Cove in the next few days.
Read in the Cinder.
They're having an open day today, so it's great to have.
And Clean is a good piece as well, I think, about the challenge for third level GAA, which Shane McGrath alludes to as well in a different context.
Okay. Fellas, thank you very much. Appreciate you both coming in. Dion Fanning from The Currency, Hugh Farrelly from The Mail. Thanks very much, lads.
Thanks, Joe.